Mr. Ellzey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. Let's go back in history a little bit. The creation of the Department of Education came about after the 1976 election in which Jimmy Carter got elected, and he promised the NEA, the nation's largest teachers union, a Department of Education. Previously, those roles had been Department of Health and Human Services and a couple of others. So in order to get that done and get the endorsement to win 1980, we created the Department of Education. I'm pretty sure that my well-spoken, well-regarded colleagues on the other side of the aisle who have questioned you previously, with the exception of one, not one of them got their public education under this Department of Education on the federal level. They were all educated by public education without having the Department of Education, Health and Human Services, Department of Justice. They all had different roles, and then we put it all into one. So we've spent billions and trillions of dollars, as you mentioned. Meanwhile, the state of Texas, I checked with my friend in the legislature, the state of Texas, which is perfectly capable of taking care of kids in the valley, in West Texas, in the Panhandle, in North Texas, down on the coast, all of which have different demographics and different needs. We're going to spend $100 billion in the state of Texas over the next 2 years providing for our own public education according to our standards because our local school districts know how to educate their kids. So if this is a question of mental health, well, that belongs at the Department of Health and Human Services. If it's about civil rights, that belongs at the Department of Justice. 10% of the funding that goes to public education in this country is sent from the states back here. Washington employs a whole bunch of people, has some strings attached, and then goes back down. So this existed prior to 1980. All of my colleagues on the right, except maybe Steny Hoyer, because he's pretty young, were educated without the Department of Education. So being a Navy pilot, I tend to watch a few movies. One of my favorites is Office Space. So let me ask you, what do you think, as the Secretary of Education, what would you say you do here? What would you say the Department of Education does, and is it accomplishing that mission, Madam Secretary?
Well, thank you very much. You've made my case quite a bit for me already. But what I found in talking with so many people when I took on this position was the misunderstanding of what the Department of Education doesn't do. It does not set curriculum. It doesn't hire teachers. It doesn't specify books. It doesn't do all of those things. It is actually a pass-through mechanism for funding that is appropriated by Congress. And whether the channels of that funding are through HHS or whether they're funneled through the DOJ or whether they're funneled through Treasury or SBA or other departments, the work is going to continue to get done. So what I've been focusing on as the Secretary of Education is really understanding where these grants are, where these programs are. How do we make sure that they aren't wasteful? How do we reevaluate the contracts, as I talked before? Let's do savings going in as we're recommending, our budget cuts. Let's make sure that the programs that we're putting in place are best serving the students of those states. And that's the work that I'm focused on every day.
Thank you. I want to make it clear to my colleagues that I think there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. Remember, 1980, Department of Education. 2001, Department of Homeland Security, which basically just added another level of bureaucracy and cost to the American taxpayer with a questionable amount of return on that investment on safety, because all those agencies underneath already existed, just like they do in the Department of Education. I would argue that I don't think that the folks of Connecticut want somebody like me telling them how to educate their kids, any more than I want anybody from Connecticut telling me how to educate my kids in the state of Texas. This is better done at the state level. There's nothing about education in the Constitution, not one word. So my case is, if it's not in the Constitution, let's start with that. Let's reabsorb the functions of the Department of Education into other agencies just like it was before. And I think we're going to be just fine, as my well-spoken, highly intelligent colleagues on the right side who were not educated under the guidelines of the Department of Education as it currently exists can attest. Thank you, and I yield back.